Welcome back to Periop Talk. I'm Jake Runion, Senior Manager of the Center for Perioperative Leadership at AORN. Joining me today is Lisa Walden, co-founder of Good Company Consulting. Lisa has a background in generational sociology, and she's here with us today to talk in depth about the latest generation in the workforce, Gen Z.
Welcome to Periop Talk, making surgery safer, one podcast at a time, with brief, practical information for you to take back to the OR.
Excited to have you back with the AORN audience, Lisa. We had 2 webinars for Leader Exchange, one on multi-generational workplace, and then one specifically on Generation Z. And that's where you'd like to pick up today's Periop Talk episode. From a Generation Z perspective, how do you define them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, Jake, we've worked together long enough. I'm going to answer this in 2 separate ways. So for those listening in, there are kind of 2 approaches or 2 different lenses to defining a generation. The first is the birth years. So it starts with the birth years. So the way that we define Gen Z in terms of what years they were born is 1996 to 2010. Of course, whenever I talk about generations, I like to say, these birth years are a starting point. It's not like you're born, December of one year and January of another, and you're entirely different people. That's not how this topic works. So to truly understand the heart of the generational conversation, to understand who Gen Z is, what we need to look at is instead the events and conditions that happen during their formative years. And this is for every generation. So formative years, what I mean by that is roughly teenage years, so roughly 13 to about 23. During that period of time, we are experiencing a great deal of brain development, coming to terms with the world around us. And so the things that are going on really impact and influence our generational identities. So events and conditions that might include things like elections, like we're going through right now, something that's happening in the political sphere. It can include economic conditions, things like hurricanes, which we've also recently experienced, or any big climate situation. It can include pop culture, music, all kinds of different things in those events and conditions. Parenting trends is one as well. And a huge one, I have to say, is technology. In fact, some generational theorists have said technology is the biggest influencer on the generational identities, the separate generational identities. So all of those different pieces go into shaping who Gen Z is. It's a long answer to your question, Jake, but we need to set the foundation in order to have this conversation. So Gen Z, again, is defined by the birth years of 96 to 2010. It's usually about 15 years for generational cohorts. But the real heart of Gen Z is defined by those things that they've experienced and the younger ones are still experiencing in their formative years.
Lisa, I recall from one of your webinars that makes 96 makes the oldest Gen Z in the workforce 28 years old. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
So if some are about 5 years into their career, let's start with the technology that you just mentioned. How has the technology and that being in front of them, basically their entire life, helped shape their worldview and expectations, would you say?
Yeah, it's such a big question to answer, but I'm going to try to give you the highlights here. So technology is absolutely essential to look at when looking at Gen Z. For a lot of people, they'll talk about my generation is millennials, also known as Gen Y, but millennial is the name that really won for my cohort. Millennials, we were born between 1980 and 1995. And for millennials, a lot of people said that we were the digital natives. We grew up with technology. We grew up with, the internet coming into the fore. And that's actually not how we see it at GC's Good Company Consulting, my business. We look at it more as millennials were digital explorers and Gen Z are the true digital natives. They're the ones who have never known a time without smartphones. The first iPhone came out in 2007. Gen Zers have pretty much, for the most part, always known a time when they had access to these supercomputers, this technology that has totally changed the way that we move through the world. And so for them, some clients will tell me when Gen Z enters the workplace, they are kind of hesitant to approach certain things. They are always asking questions. They want to know what it looks like before. How did we get to this point before? And that is so normal and natural, because if you think about it, this generation has always had access to the how. They've always been able to access information and very clear roadmap of information for how to accomplish something. So if they want to know how to change the oil in their car, they can YouTube that. If they are trying to figure out, how to fill out a form or a document, or even like sign a check, like fill out a check, something that they rarely have to do, they can look it up on TikTok. There are so many different tools for them to access. Whereas for me, a millennial, when I was younger, it was maybe I would access an Encyclopedia Britannica, and then I had to wait for dial-up to ring and go through the whole process before I could go on the internet. I saw something the other day that was, saying, remember when when we all had computer rooms, literally a computer room. This is a piece of a room in our house where we had our computers. We didn't have laptops. We didn't have smartphones. In order to access the internet, you had to go to a specific room, wait for the dial-up to happen, kick off anyone who was on the phone line, and that is where you accessed all of this information. Not so for Gen Z. They've always had ubiquitous access to information, to Wi-Fi, to these supercomputers, as I said, in their pockets at all times. So it's very natural when they enter the workforce, they're going to want information and access to that roadmap of how to get from point A to point Z, or wherever you're trying to get them. And some of my clients will find that kind of frustrating of, why do we have to feed them this information? Shouldn't they be able to figure it out by themselves? To that I say, I understand your frustration, and they just grew up in a different context than we did. So it's natural to feel a little frustrated. Change is always hard, but can we understand the why behind the what, see where it comes from, and then know that, okay, they're going to come in with slightly different needs. How do we adapt and give them what they need to be successful? Suspend judgment, work through our feelings on our own, do our own one-on-one work, processing those feelings, and then show up as leaders, able to give this new generation what they need in order to be successful. So that is one among so many different pieces of how technology has really shaped Gen Z as a generation and how they're showing up at work.
Yeah, in the operating room, I've talked to a lot of colleagues over the last probably 5 years, especially since this generation entered the workforce, Lisa, and there's so much that you need to learn as a new perioperative nurse, for example, procedures and surgeon preferences and, what's going on with the anatomy, et cetera, that some get frustrated by this, which is what I want to hit on next, but that they're used to finding the answer. So they're on their phone, they're Googling it, maybe there's other new hip ways aside from Google, but they are looking up the answer because that's what they're accustomed to being able to do. Yeah. And so historically, we in the OR have seen having your phone in the operating room as maybe a not so good of a thing, but they are utilizing this technology to their benefit. So hearing you say that, you see this play out in real life. Is it fair to say, you started to hit on this, Lisa, is it fair to say that the older generations do get frustrated with the younger generation, maybe their style, their work ethic? I know I've heard you say that generally that's the case across generations. Can you kind of talk about what you've seen and heard from the Gen Z perspective on that?
From the Gen Z perspective in terms of, people being frustrated with Gen Z, or Gen Z being frustrated with their bosses?
The older generations being frustrated with Gen Z.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And for me, it's almost humorous at this point because it happens every single time a new generation enters the world of work. It is so cyclical, so predictable that at this point, it's funny to me. It's humorous how these patterns repeat themselves almost in a, literally copy paste kind of way as new generations enter the world of work. So for millennials, we experience the same thing. Even for Gen Xers are like, we've always been great workers. Well, ask boomers about that and traditionalists about that, because they might not have the same opinion. Xers were seen as apathetic slackers when they entered the workplace. These, kids with super cynical humor. Millennials, entitled, narcissistic, lazy, wanted to have access to people in positions of authority right away. And Gen Z is just the latest generation to enter the world of work and be subject to all of these feelings of frustration because of change. I think that's what it comes down to every single time. Change is uncomfortable. We don't like change. Every generation thinks their generation is the best. I think millennials are the best. Xers think their generation is the best. Boomers always cheer and clap for their generation. No surprise, Gen Z thinks they're the best. So we all have these natural reactions to change, and that's what's happening. Am I seeing frustration with Gen Z at work from leaders? 1,100%. I work so much, Jake, as you know, in the realm of healthcare. Between Hannah, my business partner, and I, we have spoken to, I think, about 25 of the 50 states' hospital associations at this point. So we are very enmeshed in this world. We do a lot of work with nurses and nurse leaders and, of course, periop nurse leaders. And the thing that I hear again and again is these young nurses, they have no work ethic. They have extremely poor communication skills. They are not professional. They have this lack of professionalism. They're super tatted up and will have, piercings in their face, and they want to show up to the OR like that. And that's scary and new and different. And it doesn't seem super, super professional to me. They have a lack of loyalty. The list goes on and on and on and on. Mm-hmm. Nothing new to me. Same kind of stuff was said about millennials, same kind of stuff. And we can go back. Okay. So this is all the same kind of things, but we're living in a different context. So Gen Z is showing up in a different way. Also, I always have to throw this in there. Life stage is a critical component to this. They are new to the workplace. Of course, they're not going to be as polished as the rest of us. We have had time to learn. As you said, the eldest have been in the workforce for maybe 5 years. They're brand new. They're brand new to the workplace. So of course, there's going to be some learning edge there. We are teaching them how to operate in the operating room and to be nurses and to show up. So that is a thing that I think we always have to consider. In terms of the frustrations with Gen Z, there's so much to unpack there for every single one of those. I think that one of the main sticking points specifically when it comes to the periop space is this mindset that has been long held, from what I can tell from, the people I've interviewed and spoken to in the space, the nurse leaders, they will tell me themselves, we have this mindset in this culture of you throw new people into the deep end, like sink or swim, and you figure it out or you don't. And that's kind of a way of weeding out the good nurses, the good periop nurses, and the ones who maybe need to find another kind of role here. And that's the way it's been for a while. I've heard the phrase, nurses eat their young, so many times. I can't tell you how many times, unprompted by me in interviews, I hear this is the mindset that a lot of the more seasoned nurses, some of the seasoned leaders have, and it's not working with this younger generation. They're not standing for it. They're leaving. They will just leave an organization. They'll leave a hospital if they feel that they're being treated in this way. And of course, then there's the layers of frustration. Well, they're weak. They're so sensitive. They can't take feedback. They can't figure things out, by themselves. They need all this information. They can't just, work through it in their own minds.
These are all the things that I've heard leaders say as well.
Yeah. Okay.
Sure. Yes.
Yeah. Yep. These themes are surprisingly similar across the board. And I would say even far beyond the periop setting, it is something I'm seeing across the board. These themes show up sometimes in presentations. You've seen this, Jake. I will poll the room and I'll say, which of these 4 things do you think are the most complaints I get, or the thing that's the biggest complaint I hear from clients? And it's professionalism, work ethic, communication, and lack of loyalty. And often people will ask me, Lisa, can you add another option that includes all of the above? Because all of the above, and this is no matter what industry I'm speaking to. But like I said, I've seen this story. I've seen this movie many, many times. This is nothing new. It is a matter of understanding why these things are coming up and what as leaders we can do to help usher this newest generation through this beginning phase of their career. And also,
what can we do, Lisa? What can leaders and even coworkers, right, peers, do to bridge that gap? What would you offer?
Yeah, great question. So I think first it starts with suspending judgment. So I've mentioned this many times already on this call, but it's important to reiterate. As human beings, our natural reaction to change is discomfort. Many people are uncomfortable with change. So when something new, when a new element enters, our sphere, we revert to that, old as time, like human desire to protect ourselves. Totally natural and normal. And there's some layer and filter of judgment. So we We wonder, what is this new agent? We judge it. We compare it to ourselves, which is, of course, a recipe for unhappiness, to compare everyone to how we wish they would behave. So first off is suspending that judgment, is suspending the stereotypes that every generation has attached to them. Stereotypes are not helpful. That is not what generational sociology is about. I always say this topic is a lens through which you can see the people that you're working with. It is not defining them 100%. That's not how sociology works. It is a lens. It is a tool. So trying to suspend those harmful stereotypes and instead looking at, okay, what are the patterns and the traits, the characteristics here that are actually helpful? So suspending that judgment, and then leading with curiosity to truly try to understand, okay, you, Gen Zer, seem to have a different perspective around work ethic, let's say, than I do. And this is one that I hear about, I think, every single day that I do this work. Gen Z has no work ethic. They want to go home. They want to clock out, right when their time is up, even a minute before, and then they're out of there. They're not putting in extra hours. They're not going above and beyond. And I really ask leaders to think about what work ethic means to them and what work ethic looks like to the younger generations. In my opinion, it is not that Gen Z doesn't have work ethic at all. In fact, I think they have a really strong work ethic. What is true is that they have a different perspective on what work ethic looks like. It is no longer showing up 5 minutes before the boss, and leaving 5 minutes after the boss, putting in tons and tons and tons of hours. That's how you demonstrate your work ethic to a hospital, to an organization. Instead, they want to be efficient. They want to figure out the best and fastest way to accomplish things. And if that means that you can end early or shift your schedule in some kind of a way, then that's what that means. You don't have to tack on extra hours and extra time in order to prove that you have a strong work ethic. I also challenge the thought that going above and beyond is critical and necessary in every employee that you have. This generation may not want to go above and beyond. And is that inherently a bad thing? This is really uncomfortable for leaders to think about. They want hires who are all trying to go above and beyond. And I like to say, let's sit with that for a second. Is it enough for an employee to meet expectations, to meet them? I'm not talking about mediocrely meet them, but meet them, totally meet your expectations. But they're not going above and beyond. Isn't that what we're asking of people? Isn't, this is your job description. If they're doing it, is that inherently wrong?
Well, one of the things, Lisa, that I hear you saying in that is, and again, in our world, is it's not that they don't care about patient safety. It might not be that they don't care about the peers that they're working with in the operating room. It's just, to use your word, they have a different lens of what good might look like.
Absolutely. Yeah. They're a generation that is very in tune with mental health, wellness, all of these things. And I see them when they're coming into the world of work. I like to say they're not seeking for work-life balance. They're looking for work-life harmony, a way that work and life can coexist. It's not always going to be balanced. That's kind of a myth, but they can coexist and kind of, almost complement each other, like peanut butter and jelly, where I go to work and I get these tools around wellness, mental health, and skill development that maybe not even is necessarily in my, nursing career trajectory, but might be horizontal. And then I can go home and I can leave work at work and I can unplug and recharge so that when I come back to work, I'm even better and fresher. And this generation, they are unwilling, by and large, from what I have seen, to put themselves as number two. They care about patients. They love their jobs. They're extremely passionate. I've spoken to as a part of my research, I speak to Gen Z all the time. In fact, every single presentation that I do on Gen Z, I will say, if there are any Gen Zers on this call, on this meeting, in this room right now, please come talk to me afterwards if there's anything that doesn't resonate or that you want to add, because my work is always collecting information and I want to tap into the source. So they are extremely devoted, passionate. They care about their work, but they will not do it at the sacrifice of their own well-being. It is a huge...
Sounds wise.
Doesn't it sound wise?
It sounds wise, Lisa.
It's almost like you can't pour from an empty cup, and they know that. And so This is a tweak
A
that
lot of us in this older generation have tried to pour from the empty cup. At least I have.
Yeah. And there is a crash out point. There is a point at which you simply cannot give anymore. And then the people who end up losing are your patients. You obviously primarily, but these older, more seasoned generations, they are so devoted to their jobs. It is their vocation. These nurses have given their lives, but then they reach a point where they leave the industry. They leave those careers behind because they're so burnt out. Their compassion fatigue is at 100%. They cannot give an ounce more. And then we lose some of the best, brightest, most devoted minds and nurses because they burned themselves out. This generation is unwilling to do that. They know this is a long-term game. And so from day one, they're not saying, I'm going to pay my dues now so that I can, enjoy my life later, or I'm going to give it my all now while I'm young and healthy and energetic. They're like, no. This is a long game. I'm going to set boundaries now. I'm going to live my life right now so that I can be happy, healthy, energetic for the long haul. And I can be in this career. I can be a nurse for as long as I want to and know that I am taking care of myself so I can take the very best care of my patients. And I think that's kind of brilliant.
Well, as I've listened to you and you've been describing on this conversation, Lisa, I've got to imagine that there are others like myself in an older generation that might be a little envious and might be thinking back, right? Maybe there was a different way to handle my early career, my mid-career. So that's my hope, in addition to everything else that you offer in this, Lisa, is, it's not too late, for us to shift our mindset for ourselves. And then, arguably more importantly, if you're in any sort of leadership position, for the betterment of your team. And so to that end, I want to kind of shift gears a little bit to how would you offer advice around how to make the workforce more appealing and fulfilling for Gen Z?
Yeah. I just want to reiterate, Jake, it is never too late. It is never too late to shift the way you see how you work, how you lead. In fact, I have had many an occasion where I'm interviewing a leader and they'll be actually kind of complaining, like it's a vent moment. We're having a vent session about Gen Z. They're just talking to me. It's a safe space. And as they're venting, as they're saying, well, these kids, which by the way, I do not think that we should use the term kids to talk about grown adults in the workplace, but their words, not mine. So they'll say, these kids, they just show up and from day one, they want to, have these strong boundaries and go home and live their life. And wait a second, like maybe they're actually on to something now that I'm talking it through, and they'll actually have this mental shift in the conversation that I'm having with them. It's so funny and actually great to hear the journey that they take as we're having the conversation, because I do think it's such a great new thing that they're bringing into the world of work, is this shift in mindset. And I'm gonna get to your question really quickly, Jake, but one thing I wanted to mention, so there was an article released very recently, I think in the last couple of weeks here, by Korn Ferry, looking at some research suggesting that Gen Zers are not wanting to move into leadership roles. They're opting out. So they are wanting to keep their level, their roles. They're not looking to, go up that ladder, the career ladder. And it's because they're looking at their leadership and saying, nope, that's not the lifestyle I want. That does not look healthy. You're stressed all the time. You have no time for anything. You're always here. So there's a term that they used. I'm trying to remember it. I think it was conscious unbossing or something like that, something similar to that, where Gen Z is opting out of leadership roles because the way they see their leadership showing up. So it's never too late. And strategically, it's really, really important to model what a healthy leadership role can look like. And that means boundaries. That means time for yourself. That means finding joy. That means finding fun in the hospital and at work. So it is never too late, and it is very strategically important as you're looking at building an environment where you have Gen Zers that want to move up that career ladder.
Well, Lisa, real quick to that, since you went there, there's been a lot of conversation, anecdotal conversation, I would say, in the last probably even more than 5 years around that, exactly what you just brought up, specific to nursing and even specific to Periop, where managers have historically burned the midnight oil.
Yeah.
And that, wow, we really need to open our eyes, because inevitably that next generation needs to fill these shoes, whether that be a manager, an educator, anything that you might consider a leadership position or an exempt position, right? If that only means to this generation 40 hours, we need to think critically about what that needs to look like.
Yep, absolutely.
So I think that was a great point. And it's good to see research around that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. They are, it is something that, so a lot of the nurse leaders that I speak to, their hearts are in a wonderful place. They're telling me about how hard they're working. And oftentimes it's in service of the people that they're leading, of the nurses that they're leading. They'll say, I work this hard so they don't have to, or I work this hard so I can be there for them whenever they need me. And I always tell them, listen, intent-wise, your heart is in the right place. You're trying to take care of your team, and I love that, and they love that. I'm sure you are trying to take care of them. The intent is sound. The impact is different than what you intend, because you are modeling. It's the classic, do what is it? People listen to what you do, not what you say. So they're paying attention to your behaviors, not the words that are coming out of your mouth. Action is what defines mindsets more than words. So you have to think about, how do we change this model of leadership? And the response is often, it's impossible. It's impossible. I have to work this hard. I have to. There's no other way. I have to work around the clock. There's no option. I don't believe that anymore. I think that the pandemic years, in a lot of ways, cracked wide open the fallacy behind a lot of the, it's impossible, we can't do that, there's no way. There is a way. There can be a way. There are so many people thinking creatively around, how do we shift the model of healthcare, the model of leadership for the future, so that we have a future, so that we can make this sustainable, so we have a pipeline of leaders. And it is possible. I want to give, nurses, leaders, everyone in this space, confidence that it is in fact possible. I've been in so many rooms where the ideas that are brought up are just so fascinating and different and truly outside of the box thinking. So it is possible. I do think we need to lean on one another to get there. But in terms of, building a hospital that really appeals to Gen Z and all generations, because Jake, I have to say that it's not just about creating a hospital environment, a periop environment where Gen Z will thrive, and then boomers are like, I hate this. I don't want to work here. This is terrible. That's not what we're trying to do. But we are trying to create an environment where everyone thrives and Gen Z thrives as well. Flexible options, that's like number one thing. You have to think about flexible scheduling, flexible options around how they're showing up. What does that look like? What does that mean? I've had some people say, they've created roles that are 3 days a week, and they might be Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but they're fully paid in benefits. In terms of benefits, they are considered full-time employees, but they're only working, I say in parentheses, 10 to 12 hour days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And there's certain people who are good with that. There are, work your way programs. There are so many different things that people are thinking of to try and fill in this gap. Even the idea of having, more seasoned nurses who are trying to step away from their careers, they're not wanting to be there full time, working virtually and pairing with younger Gen Z nurses, and then having that moment of reverse mentorship. So a lot of thinking around flexibility, a lot of training around communication and professionalism without frustration, without saying, well, they should already know this stuff. But that shelve that thought, shelve that thought and say, well, this generation does need a little bit more training on these pieces. So how do we give them that opportunity to get this training? And I also think that obviously this is inherent in any nursing role, connecting to the why, to the grander purpose, but also connecting to the community. So building a periop environment where it's, the classic bullying that I hear so much about, and the sharpness and negativity that can come out in ORs. We need to figure that out. We need to put that as well in its place and figure out a way to really build super strong communities where psychological safety is there, trust is there, and they feel like they're supported by all of their peers and aren't afraid of that sharpness or, potential thing that might happen negatively at work. So those are a few of the pieces I think that are.
This is great. Oh, great. Thank you, Lisa. How would you, what would you say to somebody in a preceptor role? They're precepting a new nurse that's a Gen Zer. How did they go about offering feedback and mentorship? And you know what I mean? Maybe that's crucial feedback. Anything different than and I know the answer is different than another generation, but what is that, Lisa?
Yeah. So for preceptors, I would say this kind of applies to everyone, to be honest, but perhaps is even more important with Gen Z. First of all, we often have a tendency to want to, Jake, you've heard me talk about this before, but we have a tendency to want to operate in the golden rule space, to treat others the way we wish to be treated, and to mentor and lead and train others the way we wish we were trained. It's so common. And that is not a super effective strategy. I always like to tell people, shift that on its head and instead lead and operate by the platinum rule, where you treat others the way they wish to be treated, where you lead others the way they wish to be led. There's this example from when I was new to the workplace, and I had a leader, and she was amazing leader. She's actually a huge reason of why we started Good Company Consulting. And she was the leader who told me, if you have that pit in your stomach on a Sunday night, this was when she was onboarding me. She said, if you have that pit in your stomach on a Sunday night because you have to go to work on Monday, come to work on Monday, I need you to tell me because I'm doing something wrong. So she was an amazing leader. I'd never heard anything like that. I was like, wow, you're actually invested in not just the work that I do for you, but the experience that I have at work with you. And I that concept was new to me. So this leader, she was amazing. And she very much at a certain point was leading in a golden rule kind of space. So she was the kind of person who was super bombastic. She was an extrovert. I'm an introvert, believe it or not. And when she would recognize me or show appreciation, it was a small, company of about 13 people. And she would basically throw a party. She would call me to the front of we had a room and say, hello, Lisa, please come to the front desk. She was joking. And I would come up and then it would be a huge to-do, or in a meeting, she'd be like, Lisa, please stand up and claps. And I don't like that. I, in fact, hate those situations of being put on the spot and publicly acknowledged. I'm the kind of person who, for feedback, I'm like, yes, tell me the good stuff. I like the positive feedback, and I want to know all the areas that I can improve. And that's really what's going to light me up is, okay, this is how I do better next time. But she loved to do these big public celebrations for me. And at some point I was like, I can't work like this anymore. I have to let her know. So I sent her an email. I said, hey, Deborah, I love where this is coming from, but I really don't like these public moments of recognition. In fact, they kind of embarrass me. Can you just shoot me an email next time or tell me one-on-one? Because that's just my preference. And she came and talked to me immediately. She was like, oh my gosh, Lisa, I am so sorry. I had no idea. I always wish that had been done for me because it was always very much pushed aside for me, or, a couple words were dropped here and there. And I always wished I'd been celebrated more. So that's why I was celebrating you. And I'm so sorry. I had no idea that was something that was actually not making you happy. That's the last thing I want to do. So I tell you that whole big story in order to just emphasize the fact that what we want, what we wish we would have had, is not necessarily what the people we are mentoring want and need. That context about who individuals are, even beyond a generational perspective, is so critical. And Gen Zers are a generation that I hear a lot from leaders. You give them critical feedback and they're gone the next day. They are not happy about it. They get frustrated, they leave and they find something else. So I do think it's important to approach this pretty carefully. The most easy but important way to do it is simply to ask, how do you want to get feedback? What is the best and most effective way for me to give you feedback? Then you might even need to give them a few examples. They may not know right off the bat, but to ask them, to give them that space and say, and I think it works best when you do it both ways, to say, let me tell you how I like feedback. Let's say I'm a Gen Xer, and so I don't need any of that fluff. I just want it to be direct. There's nothing wrong with the fluff. I just particularly don't like it. Maybe don't call it fluff. There's nothing wrong with the positive feedback, but I don't necessarily need it. I just want to get to the point. What is it that I need to improve upon? And I'm open as your preceptor. I'm open to that because I know that I'm not going to come at this perfectly the first time. Feedback needs to go both ways in order for this to be a successful relationship. So here's how I like to receive feedback. How do you like to receive feedback? And even creating, the working with me kind of document that I've spoken to before, but for those hearing me for the first time, kind of a one pager that gets to the most important pieces of working with you as an individual. And that can be from a management perspective, from a preceptor perspective, from an individual perspective. So it can include things like, my working pet peeves are this, or is this. When reaching out to me, start with an email first, or come find me first. Whatever those things are, and it can include things like, in receiving feedback, this is how I prefer to receive feedback. Those conversations are
right.
Yeah, but they're not.
It really is, because if you're, we think and talk about relational leadership, and that applies to everyone across generations and individually.
Yep.
So that's what makes the platinum rule powerful, is because truly everybody really at the end of the day is individual.
Yeah.
So Lisa, what do you prefer is better than Gen Z. What do you prefer? Right.
Yep. And I do think the Gen Z lens is a lens. It's a piece of the puzzle, but the puzzle is big. So we're plugging this piece of information in. We're learning about this generation. We're unpacking the why behind the what, generating empathy and compassion for them. And that is a starting point. It is not the end all be all. We need to, as leaders, continue to lead with curiosity, suspend judgment, and truly understand the individuals we lead as distinct, unique human beings. That's critical.
What about for Gen Z? How can our nurses out there think about creating an environment that leverages their digital skills, their creative lens they're coming in with, to drive innovation in the workplace? How would you describe it?
That's such a great topic. And it's one where, so I had a little moment of judgment myself not too long ago, where I was in a presentation. It was a very small room, and there was someone sitting in the front row, and he was on his phone the entire time. And I was like, what is going on? Am I that boring? Is this so bad? Does he have like a urgent meeting or message that he needs to craft? But he's literally sitting in front of me. It's a little bit throwing me off. There's only 20 people in the room. You can see him right there. And so I myself had this moment of, well, what can I do? How can I get his attention? And I really ramped up the energy, and nope, he was
nothing.
Well, afterwards, he came up to me and was like, Lisa, that was an excellent presentation. Loved it. I took like 10 pages of notes. Boop. Clicked in my mind. What he was doing on his phone was taking notes in a notes app. Yeah, he was just taking notes. He was typing up his notes on his notes app. And I had, of course, jumped to that place of judgment. I think that can happen very easily with Gen Z, where leaders say, they're on their phones all the time. Why are they on their phones? We can't have phones in, a hospital setting. You need to set their phones aside. And sometimes, I'll be honest, sometimes they're, goofing around on TikTok or whatever. And who doesn't? We're all addicted to our phones at this point. They're built to be addictive. We're, most of us, addicted to our phones. And they can also be used as tools in this space. And Gen Z's savviness with technology is absolutely something that leaders need to capitalize on. One of those ways is to think about, what are the parameters you're setting around phone use? Are you talking about the why? And are you giving them space to maybe use them in your benefit?
Your advantage, yep.
Yeah, not specific to the Periop setting, but there's this amazing example from one of my clients where this nurse leader was really frustrated with one of the nurses who worked in the oncology ward, and she was on her phone every time she walked by a room and there was a patient in there. She was on her phone. Come to find out, this nurse was creating TikToks with her young patient. It was like a 9-year-old patient, and they just had this amazing bond, this amazing connection. This nurse won the Daisy Award. She just used this piece of technology to create this amazing experience for the patient and for herself. So this piece of judgment around why are you always on your phone turned out to be actually using her phone for such an incredible thing that maybe we hadn't thought about before. So, again, parameters around that, but maybe also leaving them some room to, okay, how can we use this actually in a way that benefits everyone? And the other piece is, because they are coming in with so much information, so much new training around technology and the newest, latest, greatest, reverse mentorship dynamics are some of my very favorite things. So how can you pair? Yeah. Yeah. So how do you pair a new, very digitally savvy Gen Z hire with a more seasoned nurse who's been around for a while, and have them have a situation? This is why I like reverse mentorship dynamics. It's not just about, I'm going to tell you, I'm your teacher, I'm teaching you. That's how we often frame mentorship, right? So it's the seasoned nurse is telling you or showing you all about how you need to do your job. In this dynamic, and I think this is super resonant for all generations, but maybe specifically for Gen Z and millennials, it's a loop. It's a feedback loop, as we talked about earlier, and it's also a learning loop. So I, as a new Gen Z hire, am showing and teaching my baby boomer, nurse, colleague or leader, whatever the case might be, how to use this new technology. I'm actually, introducing her to these new things, this thing that I learned, whatever it is. And then reverse, the baby boomer nurse is teaching this Gen Z hire maybe professionalism, how to engage with a patient, things that she has picked up along the way or he has picked up along the way. All of the things that you learn by being on the job, they can teach Gen Zers, and Gen Zers about technology. And it's not,
Lisa, I have an example of that myself, and everybody listening will appreciate this. Even as myself, I think I call myself a zillennial now, right?
Yep.
So I'm very top end of the millennial. I identify a little more as Generation X, but anyways, technology is not my strong suit. So we all in the operating room have a problem with preference cards. I know you've heard this in some of your interviews, right? So there's a lot of them. They have historically been either on paper back really in the day, and then they also had come onto these platforms that we use for EMR that aren't that easy to decipher. And so the first time that a younger professional I was working with used a Google sheet, I was like, wait, what? These can be shared. You can access them on your phone anywhere. They can be shared to all of your colleagues, right? It was like
edited and built. Yeah, I know. It's incredible.
And that was literally what you're talking about, right? I mean, they were just to the point where they were like, there's a better way than this.
Yep.
And they came up with it. Now, there were then, right, and this is why I love this conversation, there were then the next steps of, okay, we have this platform we're supposed to be using. How can we then incorporate this newer way of thinking, which leads to more innovation, right? It might be a combination of the two. And so they were literally shepherding us to a better way.
Absolutely. And Jake, I think that so this is such an awesome example, and I'm going to use this. So thank you for this story in the future. But your expertise was necessary as well. The people who have been interacting with the handwritten preference cards and, dealing with that, bring some wisdom and experience that is necessary in creating a Google Sheets doc that is really pulling its weight and doing what it should do. Because them introducing this new technology is amazing. And the experience and insight that you have, interfacing with this older way of doing things is critical. This is why, it's so cheesy, but it's so true that when we have diversity in opinion, diversity in thought, that's how we create the best, most innovative things that are truly going to work in our working environment. So it's both taking that new piece of technology, that new innovative idea that maybe you never would have thought of, and taking this wisdom and this experience and fusing it. And that's what makes the magic. That's why, bridging these intergenerational, gaps and really getting people to connect with one another is so magical. It creates literal magic at work.
It does. Well, yeah, we all continue to learn around how we can better work together generationally. At the end of the day, it's all of us coming together. And to your point that you just made, Lisa, if we are open-minded, we can create a better workplace through shared learnings, through reverse mentorship. I love that as well. Lisa, thank you so much for your time today. We look forward to having you back at AORN in a multitude of different ways as time goes on, because we continue to learn from your expertise and shared expertise that you get in the marketplace. So thank you.
Thank you, Jake. It is such a pleasure to be here each and every time, and I continue to learn from all of you as well. So just an honor to be invited back.
If you're Gen Z, did we hit the mark? Is there anything you'd add to the conversation? If you work alongside a Gen Z, tell us if this has helped you collaborate better with them. Leave that in the comments below. We'll see you next time on Periop Talk.
Enjoyed the episode? Please like, comment, and subscribe. For additional Periop content, look for us on Instagram at AORN Pics and on Facebook and LinkedIn at AORN. You can also find us at aorn.org. Thanks for listening.